It's Friday, early evening in Europe. It's Space Café Canada time. Our Space Café Canada by Dr. Jessica West will begin soon. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. My name is Chiara Monter. I'm the event coordinator at SpaceWatch.Global. SpaceWatch.Global is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. We are aware this is a very polarizing topic today. However, here at SpaceWatch.Global, we like to offer an independent view, giving all sides a voice. And I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keeping our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. And with Dr. Jessica West, we have found a great friend and a wonderful host for our outreach in Canada. Now, I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcasts. The latest episode features Geraldine Naya about the commercialization of ESA, the Russian absence, and why ESA might just be waiting for your job application. So definitely worth a listen. And for all our fans of audio content, we also have new episodes in our Space Café radio, so go check that out. And we also keep our fan shop online open for you to support us actively and become a space watcher. Now, if you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on the webpage in our event section and on our YouTube channel. And with that, I'd like to hand over to your host today. Jessica, over to you.
Hi. Welcome back to Space Café Canada. I am Jessica West. I'm joining you from my home in Waterloo, Ontario, which is located on the Haldimand Tract, land that was granted to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River, and is part of the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people. I'm very happy to say that today seems to be signaling the end of winter in Ontario. It's finally warm and sunny, putting me in a good mood and energizing me. But predictions are not my strong point, so don't hold me to that one. Now, our last show with Paul Meyer focused on the protracted nature of arms control efforts in outer space, and we asked whether space diplomacy is rocket science. Today, we're going to shift our focus to actual rocket science, specifically the development of a commercial spaceport in Nova Scotia, which is intended to be used by maritime launch services in the future. Now we have a great audience today, which I think shows the relevance of this topic for Canadians for different reasons and from different parts of the country and internationally. For many, the lack of ability to launch satellites from Canada, which was the third country to have a satellite in space, has been lamented. I think of it sort of as the space equivalent of the Avro Arrow. But here on Space Café Global, we've also been aware of local concerns about the effort to launch satellites from Nova Scotia. And so, since we're all about supporting informed conversation about space issues that are relevant to both experts and local citizens, we're going to do that today. And we have President and CEO of Spaceport Nova Scotia and Maritime Launch Services with us, Stephen Mattier. Stephen is joining in from his office in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is on Mi'kma'ki land. Although his current day-to-day job involves driving the development of the spaceport, he also comes to us with a background in mechanical engineering and previous work at NASA. So welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, virtually. So let's begin by learning a little bit more about you. I have not had the opportunity to meet you in person prior to our virtual meetup here on Space Café Canada. So what brought you to develop a career focused on space launch and brought you to Canada?
Oh, my career began working at a NASA facility in southern New Mexico, working on the space shuttle program. And it was through that 15, 16 years of work and then graduating to work on spaceports around the country and the globe thereafter for another 15 or so years. It really landed me in a position to start looking at more of a full-time career and then ended up finding this location for a spaceport.
Great. And so you are with Spaceport Nova Scotia and Maritime Launch Services. Right. Are those the same? What's the relationship between those two and the link to Canada?
Maritime Launch Services is the company that we started in October of 2016. When we formed the company here in Nova Scotia and began the effort to bring space launch to Canada. The name of the facility that we've begun branding over the last year or so is Spaceport Nova Scotia.
Okay, excellent. So that clarifies that question for me. Now you mentioned 2016. And so I've seen various dates. What is the current sort of status and timeline of building a spaceport in Nova Scotia?
Well, again, we started in 2016 with the overall effort, submitted an environmental document registration in 2017. Were requested to do a focus study after that came back in 2018 and received an approval from the environmental assessment in June of 2019 with a list of conditions that need to be met before we can break ground or conduct operations. So we've been in that process then of putting all the pieces together that go into a spaceport development, satellite clients, launch vehicles, regulatory framework with our federal partners, the environmental compliance pieces that we need to do, and of course the key piece of investment. And all those pieces have been kind of merging together to get us to where we are today.
So what is the future? Have you broken ground, and what are you anticipating in terms of the timeline for upcoming, I guess?
So we have been working diligently, really significant effort over the past year on the environmental compliance pieces, wetland mitigation plans, bird studies, all that kind of stuff, and working on hiring contractors to do design work for us. We've got a number of those that are doing the facility layout, road work layout, et cetera. Those we're drawing down to the end of all those pieces that we need to get done to be able to get the groundbreakings going here this summer is what we're anticipating. And then from there, it's a good 18 months of construction activities for a medium class launcher while we get to a commissioning phase to do launch, at the end of 2024 or so. We are looking at doing a small launcher earlier on because it requires significantly less infrastructure to do that, to work with our federal partners on some of the regulatory pieces that they're interested in seeing worked through as well.
Okay, now you've mentioned clients. So what kind of satellites what kind of launcher and what kind of satellite clients are you looking for and anticipating to launch? What kind of things are we going to be launching into space from here?
Sure. Well, the idea of a commercial launch site is really attractive to industry right now. The industry has really changed over the last 10 years or so since the last shuttle landing, right, in 2011. Low Earth orbit has really been ceded to commercial industry, and since then it's really gone up dramatically. The industry is at $400 billion per year. And that's because these satellite clients are coming up with ideas to do some amazing stuff. Synthetic aperture radar, global broadband kinds of things, all the technology that can be used for a lot of beneficial activities, global broadband, monitoring for methane leaks out west. Those are some of the clients that we've been talking to that really want to use our facility. And having a commercial offering for that is really attractive to them.
So there's sort of the two key components to launching something to space. There's the spaceport on the ground, and then obviously there's the rocket component. Now the plans for maritime launch are to use the Ukrainian Cyclone 4 rocket. That one doesn't have a long track record yet. And I guess I'm wondering why that rocket, but also what impact the current war might be having on your company.
I'd back up just a bit. We are
Great.
going to do a suborbital launch as early as the middle of next year with a soon-to-be announced launch vehicle, so we can gain some of that flight heritage. Then working with our federal partners, that's kind of the plan there, and try to follow that. And the reason for that is because it takes so much smaller amount of infrastructure to be able to do that. So once we finalize the terms of that agreement, we'll be sharing that with the public as well. But the idea is that we do some small launch activity first to gain some of that experience and working with our, Transport Canada as the regulatory body to go forward from there. With regard to the Cyclone 4M, which is what the vehicle is, not the Cyclone 4, it's a modification to one of the original variants, and that vehicle is comprised of all, TRL level 9 hardware, stuff that's flown before. So TRL level 9 is the highest. That's the stuff that has flight heritage. So the upper stage is an improvement on the Cyclone 3, for example. So the Cyclone 4 upper stage is an improvement and modification on proven hardware. The Cyclone 2, Cyclone 3 family upper stage is flown 228 times previously. So it's not exactly something that hasn't seen some flight experience. Our first stage comes out of Zenit technology that is also being used for the Antares rocket as we speak. So for the last 10 years, the Antares rocket has been the first stage has been manufactured by my colleagues in Ukraine. And that vehicle they do the core, but the current engines used in the Antares rocket are using Russian engines. So what we're doing instead is mapping in proven Zenit other engine technology that also has a flight heritage going into that first stage. So as you can see, what we're building is basically known quantity, proven hardware being integrated into a launch vehicle that has seen flight experience at that component level to bring that forward.
Great. And as you can see, rocket science isn't my background. So thank you for completing that picture for us. I want to speak a little bit about the Nova Scotia part, and well, the Canada and the Nova Scotia part. So I'll admit that my own interest in our conversation stems from the fact that I have family in Nova Scotia. So I've been hearing sort of bits and pieces about a spaceport being built over the last few years, but other than that, I didn't know very much about it. And I don't think we hear very much about it. So I have to say the idea of a spaceport in Canada still feels kind of surreal. Why Nova Scotia? What's the appeal of Nova Scotia?
I had mentioned the satellite industry really changing and the growth of that. Well, what I didn't mention is where people want to put their satellites. So we've gone away as an industry from 10, 15 ton satellites that are in a geosynchronous orbit that are going around the equator. Now we're looking at constellations, hundreds, if not thousands of satellites that are going to be in low Earth orbit, like 1,000 kilometers up instead of 20,000 kilometers out there, that are revolving around the Earth in what we call constellations or clusters of satellites. And it's that opportunity that I think is what is presented best by Spaceport Nova Scotia because of the range of inclinations that we have. You look off from the launch site location, and you can look due south to thousands of kilometers of open ocean to almost due east, thousands of kilometers of open ocean. So it's that wide range of inclinations. And that's where people are wanting to put their satellites today. They've gone away from geo. Now they're looking at polar, sun-synchronous, inclined orbits where these constellations then are all moving around and talking to each other and up and down and providing that global network of broadband or imaging.
Yeah, space is getting busy and changing quickly.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to wrap in a question from the audience with some of my questions, so bear with me. So what is I guess, how does this then fit into Canada and Nova Scotia more broadly? Someone has asked, Dwayne Lawrence has asked about federal and provincial support. So this is a commercial enterprise, but it seems as though you're also working with provincial and federal, well, you mentioned regulations, but governments, I suppose, is the right word. And so how do you fit into, I guess, those pictures of relationships with the province and the federal government, and what the pros and cons are for the province and the country?
So space launch, as you can imagine, is not something that any old company can go do somewhere, right? It is really driven by international treaties and norms. Going back to the 70s, frankly, that Canada has been signatories on the proliferation and the safe use of space and those kinds of things. So anything we do, we have to do with the direct collaboration with our federal partners to be able to launch rockets into space. So the Transport Canada is the regulatory body. They have legislation that's in place that allows for orbital and suborbital launches from Canada under a certain regime, requirements that have to be met to do that. The Minister of Transport is the final approval authority for rocket launch. So we're clearly linked with them. We don't go doing rocket launches without that full concurrence review. Transport Canada, NAV Canada, the Canadian Space Agency, ICED, Global Affairs, all of those federal partners are part of a all of government approach to be able to do space launch, whether it's a government range or whether it's a commercial range. All of those entities are involved in making this happen. On the provincial level, of course, where there is the regulatory approvals that go with anything you want to do, from building a building to setting up a facility of this type, and how you handle fuels and propellants and dangerous goods, et cetera. So there's all those pieces, how we're going to be managing the facility for construction and operation. So everybody's got a role to play in this.
And has there been like financial support from the government? Is this something that is, I guess, supported?
There has not been any direct financial support from any government at this point. This has been strictly done by us. That said, when I have a provincial regulator reviewing something or a federal regulator reviewing something, they're paid by the government to be able to do that. So in a roundabout way, we are receiving support because they're reviewing the documentation we submitted. It is part of their job, in a sense. But there is certainly that commitment to support us that is ongoing.
Now, you mentioned, actually, I was surprised how many different spaceports you mentioned in our introduction. And here at SpaceWatch.Global, we've been discussing a range of new spaceports being developed in Australia and Scotland, and I think the UK and elsewhere. So obviously, there's a lot of activity happening globally. Does Canada need a spaceport? How does maritime launch fit into this rapidly changing and sort of proliferating global picture of space launch options?
The number of spaceports globally, I think the last count I had was like 31, and all but one of those are government ranges with priorities for government missions. And there's a huge commercial industry that is needing more and more launch capability. So I think that opportunity is certainly there. The fact is that Canada has never done orbital launch previous to this. They generate a great deal of payloads, RadarSat-3 and the like. And there are a lot of companies building satellites in Canada. Having that opportunity to launch their satellites locally is certainly makes a good business sense for them. North America in general is where most of the satellites on Earth are manufactured. So having a location that can serve that market that is in the backyard, if you will, makes a lot of sense for the satellite community to use what we have to offer there. And when you match that with the range of inclination, so if you look at the UK or other locations, there may be slivers of let's look at Vandenberg, for example. They can't do an easterly launch like we can do. They can't launch to 45 because they're going to be overflying land and people. And that's something you don't want to do. So when you look at the range of inclinations in one location, and we're in North America, and we're in a place that serves where people want to put their satellites, is sort of a recipe that really fits well for our industry.
Okay, someone else also mentioned Norway, and I actually didn't know about the one in Norway. And so
yeah, but those they're very, very limited ranges of inclinations, anything from UK, Scotland or Norway, etc. They can't launch easterly. They can't launch, southerly. They can launch north over the poles, for example, but that's a pretty thin sliver. And what we're finding, is there's a couple of sweet spots, the sun synchronous orbit, but also like a 55-degree inclination, inclined orbit is very much a sweet spot where people are wanting to put their satellites, and we can cover that full range in our one location.
So I think that sort of ties into another question I see, which is about the prospect that other launch vehicles might be someday used from the facility.
Well, as I'd mentioned, we are looking at a phased approach to launch, with the phase one looking at a small launcher first to get some of our flight chops under our belt, right, and gain some of that experience. We have been approached by quite a few other launch vehicle developers internationally and nationally that do want to use our facility. Whether, and how that plays through is going to be clearly a collaboration with our federal and provincial partners. We're not going to do anything to upset what we've got approved and planned at this point, working with them on a process forward. And I would really, and this is something I know where you're going to go soon, so I'll dive in for you. We really respect that the community of Canso really cares about their life and livelihood, and this is lobster season 39A and B. They're very active out there right now. Getting a boat out of Canso is difficult because they're all working, and they've offered and honored our request to talk about building a launch site. We want to limit the number of launches from the facility. So what we've proposed is to ramp up to about 8 launches per year and stay at that tempo going forward. And then we want to make sure that we honor that for the foreseeable future. Should we reach a point where that launch tempo is really needed for commercial launch activities, we would go really first and foremost to the community, because they're the ones that have it in their backyard, and then go to the province, and then go to the federal government to try to implement any changes in that launch tempo.
Okay, I don't want to skip any of my questions, but since we've sort of segued a little bit into what it means to have a commercial spaceport in a local community, and so I'll admit I've driven through Canso. To me, it's sort of that last stop before hitting Cape Breton, and a great place to visit distilleries and breweries. What does it mean to have a spaceport in a community? And how are you working with the community? You mentioned the fishermen. Are there other ways in which you're working and consulting with the community?
Oh, certainly. I will tell you that, back in 2016, when we started this initiative, it was coming here to the community first. And it was working with the Fisheries Association, working with the community, holding an open house in January 2017, I believe it was, and really getting that feel for whether this is something they would consider or they would could embrace. There was a lot of disbelief at even the idea of it at that time, and so it's really going back to that community. And I learned that because of my experience in New Mexico. There was a top-down spaceport that came from the governor and Richard Branson that we're going to do this, and it really never got to that level of support for a project. So it was really by, coming in and telling them what the possibilities were, what the risks were, what the potentials were, and really being open about it, that we got that embrace to go forward. And it wasn't until we got through that and that interest from that community before we selected the site. We were in the middle of a process of down selecting at that point. So it was really based on that. We've done polling since then 3 times last year. Oh, not we, an independent organization, ran polling in the area, and there still remains very strong support for the project. That's not to say that everybody supports it. We understand that and respect that. And our goal is to continue to offer opportunities for education and to learn about what we're doing and to keep an open door and sharing everything we're doing. I think we've held 4 open houses, the last of which was last October, I think. We're going to continue to do that. We've done Q&As through the Guysborough Journal, started publishing those for a time. Any and all efforts that we can, working with the municipality leadership and councils. We've had a CLC, a Community Liaison Committee, there since December of 2017 is when we organized that, and we've been holding regular meetings and communicating through that channel more broadly into the community. So certainly open to continuing that opportunity to educate people about what we're doing, get their inputs and comments, and really change and modify whatever we need to be good citizens.
So I'm actually quite curious. You mentioned about 8 launches a year. What's involved in a launch? What I mean, if you're living there, what does it mean to have something launch? What is it, noisy, or just trying to envision this?
It's one of the pieces that we have to be careful about. We're not in Canso, right? We're near Canso. There's a Sable wind farm up on a hilltop, and it's down on Crown land south of Canso by several kilometers is where the actual launch pad site is. And I would refer you to our EA and to our focus report and our noise studies, et cetera. But if for the people in the community nearby, it's going to be relatively loud for 30 or 40 seconds as the vehicle takes off. Kind of like a lawnmower kind of loud. It's not window breaking or eardrum shattering by any means. It's very, very proven technology that has been launched globally. So we've got a good idea what this is going to sound like.
So it's not the big Falcon.
Right. No, exactly right.
Sorry. Make sure I get that name right.
People get this idea that this is some massive Saturn V going to the moon, and it's not. It's a medium class launch vehicle, and it is not a large class like the SpaceX Dragon or what have you. So, I mean, there's a fair noise. It isn't very nearby. But understand that the launch vehicle 8 times a year is going to leave the ground and be above 60,000 feet within, a matter of, I think it's 110 seconds within 5 miles of the site. So it's moving, it's gone in a very short amount of time. And there isn't a lot of sound that people are going to hear, other than right at the beginning.
I want to circle back to some other points you've just made about sort of industry and I guess commercial space in Canada, which we haven't had a lot of time to talk about on SpaceWatch, Space Café Canada yet. So, I mean, is there, other than maritime launch, is there sort of space industry in Nova Scotia? But also, I know that you're a founding member of Space Canada, which I saw just, I want to say launched, and yet obviously, I mean that figuratively, it just launched a few weeks ago. And so how do you fit into space industry in Nova Scotia and then in Canada more broadly? What's happening there?
The space industry in Nova Scotia is relatively small at this point. I mean, there is an aerospace and defense association in Halifax, and it represents quite a few dozen companies in Atlantic Canada as a part of it, and we've worked off and on with them. MDA, I know, has a presence here in Halifax as well. There's also a new CubeSat company that just started up and got some funding last year that are building satellites here because of that opportunity to be able to launch them nearby. So we do see that opportunity growing for us for sure in Nova Scotia as this industry grows. More broadly across Canada, certainly with Telesat, MDA, and quite a host of other companies, Kepler, et cetera. They've been building satellites in this industry for quite some time, robotic arms for the space station, et cetera. So there's always been a heritage and a foundation of space participation in Canada, but it hasn't included space launch to this date. There has been suborbital launch by Magellan Aero up in Churchill, Manitoba, many, many years ago, using the Black Brant rocket, which is really one of the classic sounding rockets that's still in use today by NASA, for example. So there is really a lot of heritage here. It's just not really been in orbital launch at this point.
Right. And so I'm getting reminders about questions. There's a lot of questions, and I do want to tie them into the flow of our conversation. So obviously you want to be, well, you know what, this will lead us into the question of sustainability, but we'll start with financial sustainability. And there's a question about 8 launches a year and whether or not that is conducive to sustainability.
Oh, for us, it's fantastic for us from a financial sustainability. Yes, what we need to be successful is significantly less than that. So from an investor perspective, it's a very good return on investment. For 8 launches per year in fairly short order, and especially when you're using the Cyclone 4M, that medium class launch capability can carry 5 tons of payload to low Earth orbit, and that 5 tons represents quite a few satellites. OneWeb satellite is 150 kilograms, so we're talking 20 or 30 of these satellites on board one launch at a time. So and the going price for us, what we've posted is that a launch of a Cyclone 4M is US $45 million per launch. So at 8 launches per year, there's a significant return on investment, paying for the launches and paying for the rockets themselves.
I'm like being wary of my facial expression. Finances is not my thing. I'm more of a policy person, and so I appreciate your answer and to walk us sort of through the details of the cost for launch and clients. Now, so the question about financial sustainability can lead us into other discussions on sustainability. Now, I know on the website and publicly, Maritime Launch talks about being a sustainable space launch company. What does that mean? What does that mean for you? What does that look like?
Well, I talk about it in 4 distinct areas. One is kicking off with the construction of the facility itself. We are looking to do this as much as we can in a carbon neutral fashion, taking advantage of the nearby wind farm for power generation, using battery systems for storing energy in the use of for powering our facility. Looking at passive solar and carbon capture technologies with concrete, which is a Nova Scotia real important piece that's already in place with Carbon Cure, for example. So there are a number of areas associated with how we're actually going to even build the facility that we want to be mindful of and be as carbon neutral as possible. And then when you're looking at the operation of the facility we'll be implementing an environmental management system that'll be certainly compliant, if not certified, in an ISO 14000 sense. That really is looking at that, say what you're going to do what you're going to, and prove it on how you're going to operate and manage your facility in an environmentally friendly way. This is right out of my playbook from my NASA facility at White Sands Test Facility. We're an ISO 9000, ISO 14001 certified facility using rocket fuels on a day in and day out basis since the Apollo era. And that's my experience base, right? So that's what I'm bringing with me, is all that environmental awareness, and not just awareness and not just compliance, but stewardship. That is the idea. How we use water. Do we need to retain water? Minimizing the use of water in the flame trench, those kinds of things. So actually how we operate a facility is another key part of this thing. So then you're now the next part, the third part then is looking at the launch vehicle itself. You know, the LOX kerosene is, you know, considered to be kind of a green propellant compared to some of the others. We are looking at alternative technologies for the other launch vehicles that I can't talk about much at this point, but you'll be hearing about in short order. But you know, launch vehicles themselves have relatively small footprints relative to, because of the kerosene they use. They can be there is a pollutant component, but that kerosene is also mixed with oxygen. And the kerosene is not just the everyday run-of-the-mill kerosene. It's called RP1, Rocket Propellant 1. And what makes it Rocket Propellant 1 is it's synthesized with a factor of 10 less sulfur, which is the main pollutant in kerosene. So we're using a high-grade kerosene. We're burning it with oxygen, so you get really good combustion. So there's much less of an imprint from that quantity of kerosene compared to the typical kerosene you use in a motorboat or home heating. The upper stage propellants, of course, are using hypergolic propellants, and the industry would love to replace those. There are some really exciting new technologies that are coming, but those are used in orbit, and those have to be used in orbit only for attitude control of rockets. For example, the Dragon capsule that goes to the International Space Station uses those same types of propellants to be able to do the attitude control that's required. So there's really no way to get around using those at this point. So the last piece, though, is the satellites and what we're doing in space. Our first customer is NanoRacks, right? Our agreement with them is to adapt our upper stage with what they call a mission extension kit to be able to repurpose that upper stage in orbit. Typically, the upper stage is a satellite that gets dumped and parked into a junk orbit, has to be controlled and monitored for 25 years. Our advancement in the collaboration with NanoRacks is to use the MEK. So we deploy our mission, then we hand over the upper stage to NanoRacks, and they use it for alternatives like other science platforms, other mission activities. We're working with a customer in collaboration with them to actually go in and do a remove and replace, to pull a dead satellite out of orbit and get it into a position where it can be burned up on reentry instead of staying as space debris for many, many years, and actually replacing it with a working satellite. So that's part of that whole energy we've got, where we're working with customers on remove and replace technologies and on repurposing upper stages that they aren't just left into a junk orbit. So it really is 4 areas: building the site, operating the site, launching the vehicles, and also how we're working with our satellite clients.
So I do want to come back to the question of fuel, because that was quite technical. And there's questions in the chat, but also I know this has come up a lot, and we've had Michael Byers on our show before, actually on both the Canada and the global show. And you know, there's been questions raised about what happens if there's accidents, and I think someone else asked sort of about transporting things to the spaceport. So I guess what are the risks that could accompany, say, launch failure or other contamination issues? And I want to say, are you preparing? I'm assuming you're preparing. So how are you preparing for those?
Well, certainly, and that comes straight out of my NASA background and in how we operated and ran the space shuttle program. And I was a part of, pleased to be a part of for 16 years. One deals with and plans for the worst case scenarios and puts in, first you work at putting in the engineering controls, and how you're going to handle the material, how it's going to come in, how you're going to escort it, how you're going to respond if something happens. All those pieces go into how you're going to operate your facility. At the end of the day, you do your best to make sure that everything goes off safely, but then you plan for that worst case scenario. If there is a launch failure or at any point in the mission, that's got to be proven and shown to our federal partners as well, that we have a plan in place to respond and to deal with any of those kinds of situations. So it's really about working with federal partners, working with the industry standards, and learning from what has been done now for 60 plus years in how to safely deal with this stuff. You can characterize it as this isn't fire in a forest that's running out of control. It's fire in a fireplace or in an oven that's cooking your food. Those are all engineering controls. Those are all things that you do that help you not burn yourself or burn your house down. It's the same sort of thing on a much obviously larger scale, dealing with the rocket launch and how you operate your facility, how you bring your propellants in. At the White Sands test facility that I worked at, propellants were delivered by these customers by the manufacturers, by over-the-road trailers and brought to a facility. When it reached our control, though, that's when it's escorted. We have fire departments that are trailing behind it, making sure from our control in that last mile, we've got the engineering controls and responses planned to be able to deal with it. For our propellants, the RP1, the kerosene will likely come over the road. It's not any different. It's less volatile, frankly, than the gasoline tankers that people see at the gas station loading up and driving down the road at any point. Liquid oxygen is already transported all over Atlantic Canada. It's used in the lobster industry already. And in hospitals and all kinds of environments like that. The rocket fuels, the upper stage propellants, those will likely come by sea vessel, which would bring them into the port of Canso, where then that last mile, there's going to be the controls that are put in place that would get it onto the site.
Right. I know the question of sustainability is also not just an individual company issue. It's sort of industry-wide, and it's certainly a really big focus of space activity. So, is this a topic of conversation? Is this something that the launch industry as a whole is looking at? Are there plans to make space launch greener and more sustainable down the road? I know someone else asked about reusability, and so that's sort of a part of that conversation, but what else is happening at an industry level when it comes to linking sustainability to space launch and space access?
Yeah, the reusability is an interesting piece that has really just been demonstrated recently by SpaceX with the flyback boosters, et cetera. Whether that's truly demonstrating something, the amount of effort that goes into repurposing in that stage for reuse, one could really wonder whether it's environmentally making much of a difference or not. And yes, the material, the aluminum or whatever, aluminum is certainly going to be reused, but all the processes that go into that reuse really does have a carbon footprint as well. I can drive you right back to the space shuttle program. Virtually every launch of a space shuttle required almost $100 million of investment to get that space shuttle ready to fly again. It was almost new, basically, every time it flew. So reusability is overused in some sense, and it's not quite proven, but it is certainly a place we need to go. There's no doubt about that. There are some green propellant technologies that are on the horizon. There's even some in Canada I can't tell you about, but I think you'll be learning about soon. That has some real green aspects to it that I think is going to be very powerful. As far as the hypergolic propellants, there is some testing on what's called HAN, for example, hydroxy ammonia nitrate as a hypergolic propellant that actually is considered to be greener. It's just the title of it is scary as heck to me, but there is a lot of interest in coming up with greener propellants for sure for the future. And that reusability of launch vehicles is certainly a goal as well.
Now you have my interest piqued, and you can't tell me about green fuel from Canada. So maybe that will be a topic for another Space Café Canada sometime down the road if we can learn more about what's happening. I am trying to keep my eye on the clock as well as the questions I had wanted to ask you. But let's make sure we got some things that I know you wanted to talk about in there. So this week was a big week for Maritime launch. I believe, and again, I'm not the finance person in my family, but make sure I get this right. I believe you had your first closing of the public offering for the company. Is that correct?
We are now a publicly traded company on the NEO exchange in Canada. Yes, officially as of a bell ringing on Wednesday morning at 9:30 Eastern. It was very, very fun. And so we've begun trading stock, which to me allows for a lot of interest in the public to be able to participate in space launch in Canada, because it's listed in Canada. Only Canadians can invest in it at this point. So the idea that there is this opportunity for Canadians to participate in space launch in Canada, that opportunity is there with our public listing. But what came with that public listing was also some financing that will help us move this project forward. Just over the last 12 months, we brought in close to $20 million, which has really been helpful in making us move the needle and move the project forward and get some significant advancements. And it really does allow us to get through that first launch next year of a suborbital launch demonstration in the middle of next year timeframe.
So there's a few more questions sort of related to this theme. And I don't want to show my lack of financial acumen, but one question is about the decision about how many shares would be offered, about 400 shares, and sort of why this decision was made. I guess what happened with the public offering? How did that go? And what does it look like?
We conducted it as a reverse takeover of Jaguar Financial Corporation. They were essentially a shell company that were traded on the stock exchange in Canada already. They'd been in existence for 6 or 7 years, I believe, and it was through that opportunity of this company that we did this amalgamation, this reverse takeover. So now Jaguar is renamed Maritime Launch Services Inc. Maritime Launch Services Limited still exists. That's still us. We're still here in Nova Scotia, but it's a subsidiary of Maritime Launch Services Inc., which is a publicly traded company on the NEO exchange. And it was just through that negotiation that we ended up with a number of shares that are currently available in that coordination and collaboration with Jaguar.
Okay, and this leads to other questions that we'd wanted to talk about. So who are the key financial investors in the company? And then also we can actually, and then I have another follow-up question that's more broad.
Well, I have to mention the ticker because I'm particularly fond of that for this. It's MAXQ, if you're looking for that on the stock exchange, MAXQ. And the reason for that is totally rocket geeky, and anybody, Torsten, I know you will know what MAXQ is all about. It's that point in launch where the maximum dynamic pressure is felt on the launch vehicle. And it was 4 letters, it was available, and we're a launch vehicle company, grabbed it. So delighted to have MAXQ as our ticker for this. And because of that, I forgot your question.
So someone was asking about who are the other investors in the company, and then that will lead into another question. So,
well, all of that had to be published associated with the public filing. Two of the principals are Primary One and Power One and Primary Capital, based in Toronto. Jacob Capital Management. Sasha Jacob is now chairman of board and one of our early investors. We've had a number of really strategic investors in Nova Scotia as well. Lindsay Construction, Nova Construction, really shared our vision early and got involved with us as investors in the company as well. But for the full list, I would drive you to that filing statement, because they're all listed there.
So what are some of the challenges of raising capital and investment for commercial space launch?
That belief factor, right? I mean, it's the same challenge that I had when I went to Canso the first time. It's like, you want to do what? You want to launch rockets near Canso, and that believability factor, and it's really taken some time to really get that to take hold, for people to accept that the art of the possible, right? And by sticking with it, by my family moving up here and being a part of this effort for the last few years from the States, and making a go of it here, working through EAs, working through focus reports, working through land lease offers, working with our federal partners and flight safety analyses and ground safety analyses, and showing the art of the possible, that it's really matured to that point. And the same is true with the investor network. They're starting to realize that, the art of the possible, that, it's time. When you look at what the prospect is, or this is going to be $1 trillion industry annually by 2040, whether it's Internet of Things, global broadband, all those kinds of things that are going on, controlling vehicles from space, and all that. It's on a marked path for that $1 trillion. And why shouldn't Canada have an opportunity to have a larger role in that, when geographically and politically and from a technology perspective, and a Canadian Space Agency talent pool that exists, and the student, we've won more competitions in suborbital launch programs in the States than the folks in the States. If you go down to Spaceport America, all our universities are building these rockets and going down there for these competitions and winning them. We've got this huge opportunity with all this capital, human capital as well, to really make a go of this. Why shouldn't we be a part of this soon-to-be $1 trillion industry?
So yeah, I'm right near University of Waterloo, and I know they have a team working on that this year. I saw in our local newspaper. At the same time, so it's challenging to raise funds for a commercial spaceport and commercial launch, but there's also, as you mentioned, a lot of investment happening from both governments, not just the spaceports, but private launch vehicles, as well as private investors. We don't need to mention maybe the most famous private investor in space is Elon Musk, but the story is much bigger than that. And so what does that tell us about sort of what's happening in the commercial space industry, and how Canada will play into this?
Well, I think there's some real exuberance. Exactly right. There was, just last year, I think it was over $15 billion of investment from private entities into startups, and whether it's satellite companies or launch vehicle companies or whatever it is. So it was almost double, from the year before, the amount of investment that's going into it. You're seeing a lot of companies do, what are called SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies. They're reverse takeovers of a sort that are positioned for companies to take advantage of, to launch their companies, no pun intended, and really build. And that's happened a lot in the last few years. And in my opinion, in the direction, we actually got approached, and we're looking at a SPAC ourselves as an opportunity going forward versus the reverse takeover we ended up executing. So there's a lot of exuberance and a lot of interest in that. I think there's going to be limitations on launch companies. I think there's going to grow to be limitations on satellite companies. There's only so many satellite companies that are producing a kind of satellite for a technology that'll be needed, right? So I think there's going to be some shifting in leveling, if you will, in some of that exuberance over the years ahead. But our approach is really to build this brick by brick and not to build anything that seems or sounds like a house of cards, but build something with a solid foundation. That's why it's taken us this time to get here. And in doing this piecewise, stepwise, brick by brick, to me, that means we're going to be there in the lasting ones out the end of this. So when you match that with a location that you can't get anywhere else, where everybody wants to put their satellites on top of it all, the whole location adage, right, times three, that's sort of a uniqueness that I think that will rise above if there is an adjustment in our industry. I mean, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, lots of governments, lots of countries, we've been approached by a number of people that want us to replicate what we're doing elsewhere and around the globe, which, project management 101, stay focused on what you're doing, right? No scope creep. So we'll try to work to be successful here, but why shouldn't commercial launch be a part of the commercial space program, right? The commercial space sector using government ranges is sort of a dichotomy, if you think about it. I mean, why shouldn't there be more commercial launch sites?
So you've mentioned sort of the time to get where you are, and there's a great question about how spaceports are regulated in Canada, which I'm sure you now have firsthand experience with. Is there a licensing procedure for spaceports in Canada? I mean, this is the first one, so I guess part of it has also been figuring that out, but how does it work?
Well, we've had the real pleasure to work with Transport Canada, our federal partners, on where they've been and where they're going with respect to the regulatory framework. Yes, there doesn't exist a regulatory framework. I mentioned the Black Brants from Magellan and Churchill, Manitoba previously. That was part of an approval process for orbital and suborbital launches. So those regulations exist. We have done suborbital launches in our history, more than 20 years ago now. So there is that process that already exists and in place. Yes, it's dated, and now they've been working behind the scenes in refining and bringing that regulation forward and in working with us for what that final regulatory framework is that we're going to be using and following to be able to do launches from Canada. So it does exist previously, and we do expect that with our federal partners, it'll be refreshed and we'll be using something more current.
So there's another question about launch viewing, and I'm not going to lie, I work with a lot of colleagues in the United States, many of whom have gone to launches and been there. I have not. This is not something I have done. So will there be an opportunity to view launches for the public? I guess, well, for Canadians, but anyone else who chooses to go? Is there going to be did someone say a viewing deck, or is it going to be not, or is that not going to happen? Am I going to be able to watch, I guess, when I go?
Outside an exclusion zone around the facility itself, of course, there is going to be plenty of viewing. I've looked at this and I don't have an animation of it yet, but I think if it's a day launch or even a night launch, you're going to be able to see it fly by even from Halifax. So yes, you'll see it streaking across the sky. Now, so local to the facility there, in the communities of Canso, Hazel Hill, and Little Dover. Clearly, they're going to be able to see it going south, Tor Bay and down the coast. You're certainly going to be able to see it from Cape Breton Island. Looking south, you're going to be able to see it out on the ocean, away from the safety zone around the site. You're going to be able to see it absolutely visible, very much. And the night launches are especially interesting because that streak across the sky is very much visible from. We've seen launches here in Nova Scotia from Virginia that have gone into orbit.
And so the flip side, just before we wrap up, though, is okay. So some people will be very keen to see a space launch, and then other people will be very keen to not know anything about a space launch happening. Will this affect sort of day-to-day life when there's a launch happening for just regular residents going about their lives?
On the site itself, I mean, the launch is really a preparation of 6 to 8 weeks of the vehicle and the payload all being integrated together and prepared and taken down to the stand to the launch pad itself. So they're not going to see any of that. That's over on the launch facility itself. The Launch Control Center, of course, will see a pickup of activity where it's located and people working in and around that facility itself. What typically happens if you implant yourself in Florida or Vandenberg or someplace else, 3 to 5 days before a launch, there's going to be people coming from the community from around the globe, from across Canada, that are going to want to see a rocket launch. So there's going to be that tourism opportunity that I think people are going to want to come and witness a rocket launch from Canada for sure. So, at that point, it may get a little crowded in the community. But as I said, you'll be able to see it from pretty far away as well. So leading up to that launch, there's going to be just the visitors to the area that are going to want to come see it. And then following the launch, they're going to want to start exploring the province as well, in Atlantic Canada and the region itself as well. So I think that's seen as, we've worked with the tourism department at the provincial level and in Guysborough, and there's a real interest in what happens around a launch and where people are going to stay, where people are going to go, before, during, and then after that launch itself, and what that could mean for tourism opportunities here for sure.
I had a few more questions. Our Q&A has been quite lively, and I think we've done our best to try to balance the questions that you wanted to talk about, that I wanted to talk about, that the audience is asking. Thanks to the audience for such great participation. We will maybe make note and save the questions that we haven't gotten to, that we can send to you, because I know it's hard to keep track of everything. But I do want to say that I think this conversation really points to the fact that we need more public engagement and conversation about what's happening when it comes to space in Canada. I think a lot of it is not always on the public radar and not necessarily something that we talk a lot about as a public here. So I want to thank you for taking the time to come here. And maybe, I know we have to say goodbye with Chiara and people have time, but I guess I wanted to give you the opportunity for that one last comment about where you see this going. What does success mean and look like to you going forward?
So, what gets me up in the morning is that I see this really important opportunity for space launch to really change how we live on our globe. My daughters and I consider ourselves really truly environmentalists. We care about our planet. We want to see things improve for everybody, and that opportunity, I think, is what really drives and motivates me, is to be able to be a part of something bigger that can make something happen. So, being able to monitor our globe for climate change and be able to make a difference there, to be able to monitor our oceans, to be able to find and detect methane leaks or do the things that I think are going to really make a difference for us going forward. You know, when I worked in the NASA program, it's hard to really understand and capture how much benefit we see on a day-to-day basis as a result of those early successes of the space shuttle program, for example, or even Apollo before that. But I think that's what the opportunity is for space launch and Space Launch in Canada, is for us to really reach a new level of ownership of the globe itself as a whole, not just with these concise borders. So, you know, being a part of that potential is really what excites me about Spaceport Nova Scotia.
Thank you. That's a great way to close. Raising the profile of how we benefit from space is something I struggle with as well. It's hard to see when it's far away sometimes, and when the concrete benefits are somewhat disconnected from the materiality. I do want to hand it back to Chiara. I'll say I've abused my hosting role a little bit to take a few extra minutes away from her, but we'll hand the baton back to Chiara to close us out. And once again, thanks everyone for joining and for the comments and the questions. I don't think I've ever had so many engaged questions before, so this has been great. Chiara?
Thank you so much. This hour went by so quickly. Very, very fun to see. Before we leave you for today, I just want to give you a brief rundown of our next upcoming events. So next week, Monday, the 2nd of May, we're kicking it off with our Space Café Austria by the wonderful Judith Delaney, who will be talking with Thomas Rosinski of the European Space Policy Institute. Then on the 3rd of May, we have our 33 minutes with Dr. Jana Robinson of PSSI about the upcoming conference in Prague. And then on the 10th of May, we have our 33 minutes with Nicole Thalhofer of the BDLI, the German Aerospace Industries Association. On the 11th of May, there's the next Space Café Young Global Talents, hosted by me, on the topic of space debris. And on the 12th of May, we'll have our next Space Café Germany by Andreas Schäfers with Dr. Holger Krag of ESA, which will be in German. All events are going to be online on Eventbrite. And as always, we love to hear your feedback, so check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for our daily or biweekly newsletters of SpaceWatch.Global. And if you want to treat yourselves to something special, become a Space Watcher today or help us out in the supporter program. Thank you all so much for your interest today, for asking so many questions and for being so engaged. It's really wonderful to see. And a huge thank you to Jessica and Stephen for this inspiring and insightful talk and for being our guests. And thanks to the entire team behind the scenes for doing this great job week in and week out. I hope that you all stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you for joining us. I hope to see you in the next weeks. And in the meantime, visit our website, follow us on social media, and don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you so much.